Okay, so George, great to have you back on the show. Let's just jump right into it and talk. Yep. Let's just jump right into it and talk about Trump's behavior in court. I mean, we know that he was a mess in Judge Kaplan's courtroom during the E. Jean Carroll trial. In fact, I watched him as he was a complete and total mess in Judge Engoron's courtroom.
Right.
Do you see his behavior getting any better with each of the subsequent trials that's to take place?
No. That was a hard question, Michael. No, I do not see him getting better. No. We have what we have, and he's only going to get worse. I mean, we've watched this psycho for years, and he only gets worse. He never gets better. And he's under a lot of pressure. I mean, he owes Jean Carroll now $88.3 million. He's going to owe the state of New York probably a couple $100 million on top of that, maybe $300 million. We don't know. We'll see. We might find out at 5 o'clock today. Who knows? He's facing 91 felony counts. And, you know, he's facing the pressure. I mean, the chickens have come home to roost. He laid those eggs. He has behaved in the way that he has behaved, in a way that, you know, for many years, he did not face consequences, but now the consequences are coming, and they're coming all at once, and he's not happy. And he's going to get even unhappier. To borrow a Taylor Swift song title, it's going to be a cruel summer for him.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because a lot of people don't know. I've known you probably since around the
2006.
Early 2000, 2006?
2006 was when we had that condo thingy.
Exactly. Here in New York. And
correct.
We both had a chance. I wasn't working for him at that point in time.
No, you weren't.
And obviously neither were you. The interesting thing, do you see a big difference? Because the more I start to reflect upon his behavior, even at those meetings, especially the contentious one, the more I see a similarity into his behavior. There's just nothing but defiance.
Right. And he had a better case then. I mean, I think he was, he had a better case at that point in time. But his behavior was very demonstrative and very rude. And at that meeting, but those people deserved it more than the federal judge and the state judge and the rape victim deserve it, and the jury. But it's the same, you know, it's of a piece. There's no question about that.
You know, it's funny because I get asked the question a lot about, you know, Judge Engoron's case, and obviously we're expecting the decision to pop any day now. At least that's based upon Judge Engoron's own statements. But I think that the number
of the month
exceeds.
And that's today.
Yeah, and I think that the number is going to exceed $600 million. And I say that because
I defer to you on that, because I confess I have not followed that case that closely. There's only so much bandwidth with all this litigation that he has embroiled himself in. I just have not followed the New York civil case as closely as I probably should. But
see, I'm taking the $370 million that Tish James has shown that that needs to be disgorged.
Right.
And all I'm doing is tacking on the statutory 9% per annum multiplied times 6 years. And then there's also penalties associated with that as well, which brings you into the low 600 number. I mean, it's a ton of money.
It's going to be a ton of money no matter what. I mean, there's just no question about it. The amount of money he was running through that organization, and the fact that the books were all, were fundamentally fraudulent. You have to expect a large number, and I think he knows that.
I do too, and I think that's why he's acting out in the manner that he is. But George, let me ask you this question. Do you think that Trump will somehow get around paying E. Jean Carroll? Do you think that he actually, I mean, do you think that he can get around paying her?
No, because he has to, if he wants to appeal, look, under the federal rules of civil procedure, 30 days after judgment is entered, the plaintiff can start collecting the judgment, which means that somebody can start running around, attaching liens to things, and trying to levy his bank accounts, and just generally making his life miserable. Now, the one thing he's got going for him is that very little of his stuff is titled in his own name, but that's also, conversely a problem for him. Because if he wants to avoid all these attachment mechanisms, he has to either post a bond, which he'll have to pay a fee for, or deposit the money into the court. Now, it appears that he may not be able to get a bond. He was not able to bond, or maybe he chose not to, but I don't really know. But it's hard to imagine why anybody wouldn't want to post the bond and pay the bonding fee instead of coughing up $5 million. But he ended up paying the $5 million that he owes Jean Carroll from the 2023 judgment. He paid it into a court escrow account called the Chris account in the Southern District of New York. And everybody was wondering when he did that, well, why did he do that? Why didn't he just post a bond like every other defendant who is appealing a monetary judgment against them? And, one answer is he might not want it. He's too cheap to pay the bonding fee, but that doesn't really make any sense. It's like, why instead he's forking out $5 million that he won't have the use of. So it's really, there's something going on there. And if he had trouble bonding the $5 million, he's going to have trouble bonding 83.3. And I've heard it suggested or reported somewhere that the monitor, Judge Jones, who was appointed by the state Supreme Court, may have is this true? Did you hear this? I just saw like an inkling of this.
She found
Trump
an error
Corporation,
yeah.
The Trump Corporation put up that $5 million, the Trump organization. Is that true? Which I don't know is proper, but I don't know.
That's what I know. The same. That's where the money came from.
Well, that I don't know if that, interesting. That I don't know whether that was proper either. Probably not. But he's got to come up with 83.3 million or post a bond in that amount, or else he's Robbie Kaplan can start running around trying to collect the money. And the other thing that Jean Carroll and Robbie could do would be to sell the judgment in essence, or engage in have some kind of an arrangement with a litigation financer, which they may already have, since there is some litigation financing involved that he has complained about. And that person can fund the collection of the judgment and give Jean Carroll, so many cents on the dollar. The more difficult it is to chase a person around for assets, obviously, the less that the plaintiff will get. But there's $83.3 million here, and even if she got like 33% of it or 50% of it, that's plenty of money. So that is the other thing that can happen. You can basically sell the judgment to someone, and that person can collect and make that person can profit by paying, buying low and buying at a fraction of the judgment, and then collecting more than he paid for it, and less expenses, of course. I mean, that's something that, if remember a guy named Singer. He was a Republican donor. That's what he did with foreign sovereign bonds, and you made a ton of money. It's very, very similar. You buy bonds, you buy an asset on the discount, and then you try to collect on it. And people do that with judgments. So she's going to get something. She's already going to get the $5 million that is deposited in the court account, because that money, unless the judgment is reversed, and I just don't see any way that's going to happen, that money is going to be dispersed to her when all appeals have run. So, and then now he's got, you see his post last night where he says he's now interviewing lawyers for his appeals in the.
I guess Alina Habba. And by the way,
Alina has not, I guess.
I loved your tweet. But George, let me ask you this then. Do you think that his voters, or I should say his sycophantic followers, are paying his bills, one donation at a time? I know for a fact that they're paying his legal bills. In fact, it's been it's been divulged that $50 million has already been paid in legal fees. Could you imagine this number, George? $50 million has been paid to these bunch of schmucks, right? $50 million, but it's being paid for by the PAC. You think that they're going to end up paying this $83.3 million?
I have no idea. I don't know whether that's proper or legal. I don't know where I just simply don't know what the limitations on the use of PAC money are, but it doesn't strike me as particularly kosher. I will defer to others on that.
Yeah, I mean, $50 million coming out of the PAC. I'm not so sure that the folks that are donating to the PAC are donating it for the purpose of paying Donald's legal bills, but
they have no idea why they're donating it.
Who knows?
They have no idea. It's the biggest grift on the planet.
Yeah. So since we were talking about Alina Habba, let me ask you this, because I mean, talk about Alina Habba having a fast turnaround after she sent that threatening letter to Judge Kaplan. I mean, supposedly based on that New York Post article. But once Roberta Kaplan, E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, denied the claims, Habba did the smart thing and she backed off, claiming that it was just an inquiry, as if she was now going to fool somebody into believing that it was just an inquiry. What do you think that Judge Kaplan should do at this point in terms of to punish her for this type of behavior?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's worth it for Judge Kaplan to punish her for this, but she should be deeply, deeply embarrassed. I mean, the allegation that she made, the claim that she made, which was partially based on a true fact, but partially based on a distortion of a true fact, was that there should be recusal because Robbie Kaplan, who is Jean Carroll's lawyer, worked at Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, a major New York City law firm, in the 1990s, and overlapped with Judge Kaplan, who was then a senior partner at that firm, for 2 years. This was 30 years ago. There is not even a shadow of a basis for recusal in those facts. Even if the judge had been her mentor, it would not be a basis for recusal. No, I mean, one of the woman who delivered the closing rebuttal was actually a former clerk of Judge Kaplan. She actually worked for him individually 10 or 15 years ago, or however many it is. Clerks are not. People who work with other people are not, though that's not a basis for recusal. If you're a family member, yes. If you have some kind of financial tie to a litigant or its counsel, yes, that's a basis for recusal. But professional relations, and particularly ones that were remote like this, and working in the same 400, 500 person law firm at least, is just insane. And Alina Habba only showed her absolute incompetence and ignorance in even suggesting that those facts could warrant recusal. It was just, she embarrassed herself once again. But she's not, I don't know that she's capable of shame. But I think she realized what trouble she was in. Somebody must have told her. And, she probably did it because, the Donald, somebody handed the New York Post clipping to the Donald and he screamed at her and she went off and wrote a letter and she didn't think about it. And then she got hammered for it.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to Habba, she really doesn't think too much. But if you were going to make that sort of a claim, isn't it proper that you bring it at the beginning of the case when you say, hey, Your Honor,
yes.
this has come across. You don't do it after you get, smacked around with an 83 point.
It's even more ridiculous than that because everybody in New York who's a litigator knows he came from Paul Weiss. Okay. And everybody knows that Robbie Kaplan, who won that Windsor against the United States, she's a very, very well-known lawyer in the city of New York. Everyone knows she split off from Paul Weiss to join, to start her own firm. Everybody knows these people were associated at one point or another with Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. Okay, it's not a secret. It was not a secret in 2020 when the first of these cases was brought. that's another reason why it's just an embarrassment that she even made this, that Alina Habba even made this suggestion. I mean, it boggles the mind how stupid this was.
You know, it's funny too, because we all know here anybody that practices law knows who Judge Kaplan is.
Yes,
he is a very well.
He's one of the best judges in the Southern District, and he's been there for 30 years.
Yeah, and he's got a very good reputation of being straightforward. Listen, and I'm only talking about Judge Kaplan. There are others that I don't have such high esteem for. But Judge Kaplan is known as being an incredibly fair, but a very by-the-book specific, tough judge.
He's the consummate federal judge. Tough but fair. And that's what we like. That's what people think of when they think of federal judges. And he's just a model federal judge.
Yeah. And then, again, because Alina Habba is now coming off of the earlier case, the one that I was testifying at, which is the New York Attorney General case before Judge Engoron. Now, I happen to think Engoron is a very nice guy, but let me also say he happens to be incredibly patient, and he happens to be a different type of a judge than Judge Kaplan.
Absolutely.
Very, very different. He allowed Alina Habba to do many things that most judges would turn around and say, that's just improper. For example, how she would try to ask a question. She doesn't ask it as a question. She gives it as a direct statement and asks you to agree with it, which is really not a proper way to ask a question.
It is actually a proper way to ask a question if the witness is hostile. It's actually the proper way to ask. But I know what you're saying. She didn't know how to, for example, in the Jean Carroll case, how to examine a witness on the basis of his inconsistent or allegedly inconsistent deposition testimony. You read the testimony and then you ask the witness, was that your testimony at your deposition? It's not hard to do. There's no magic to it, and she couldn't do it. And the judge had to basically say, "Hey, lady, you gotta bone up on trial practice here." It was just another embarrassment.
Yeah, and then he's, why don't we take a few minutes as a timeout, and maybe somebody can refresh you on how you introduce a document into evidence so that you can use it for your cross-examination. I mean, this is supposed to be, you learn that shit in moot court, to be honest with you. And the fact that
high school students do this. They have these court things for high school students who learn this stuff. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And this is just the beginning. So now I understand that he, meaning Donald Trump, is looking for new appellate counsel.
How many lawyers has he gone through in the last 6 years? 7 years?
Probably more than working for Willis.
It's mind-boggling how many lawyers he's gone through. Mind-boggling.
Well, first and foremost, he doesn't pay. And second, what he asks you to do are things that most lawyers will not do. They want to create the legal strategy that they intend to employ, whether it's the strategy for an appeal, the strategy for a deposition, the strategy for a trial, whatever it might be. But that's not what Donald wants. He wants to tell you.
Donald is not capable of strategy. He's not capable of strategy. He's not capable of thinking more than one step ahead. He just emotes and he reacts and he screams and he wants the lawyers to do something, usually things that they can't do, either ethically or practically. And that's why so many of them, for example, in the 2000 election litigation, so many of them have been brought up on sanctions. It's just he is, I have this hat here, which you might actually appreciate. I don't know if you've seen it. Hold on. Let me go get it. I'm going to disconnect myself.
Only on the Culpa podcast do we have a guest who decides that we need to show. What do we got there, George?
This hat, you can relate to this hat, dude. Make
Yes.
attorneys get attorneys. That's what he does. That is absolutely what he does. I also have this T-shirt that says, let me show you the T-shirt. I don't know if you've seen this. Hold on.
This is fantastic. Once again, you can't make this sort of stuff up.
You see it? I was inmate PO 11-35809's lawyer for a few days, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt saying I'm inmate PO 11-35824, which is that guy who was, what's his name? Who was at the Justice Department who wanted to become Attorney General. I forget his name already, but anyway, this is, you can't make this stuff up. So that's why those are my Christmas gifts for you. You deserve these.
So, one of the problems, thank you. One of the problems that you have when you're talking about, and you were right, there is no strategy, but he has an idea. He gets an inkling, he gets a thought, and he wants the lawyer, an impulse, and he wants the lawyer to go and to act upon his impulse and to create a law around his impulse in order to justify the way he feels, because he believes that impulse is a winning strategy. I know it's all circuitous, but that's really how he thinks. And most lawyers, especially any decent lawyer, is going to say to him, fuck off. I don't have the ability to create law because you have an idea.
Or facts.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets something in his head. He can't sort out. His mind is so jumbled. He can't sort out reality from fantasy, from his own lies, from things he wants people to believe. His mind is a complete jumble. And as you know, he's a sociopath. He doesn't care about truth or lies. And as a sociopath, he's completely impulsive. And that's part of why he shouldn't be all these reasons are why he shouldn't be president, and all these reasons why make him a bad client. He just thinks that, okay, he comes up, somebody gives him an idea, and it's the last thing in his head, and then he wants them to execute it. And then the next day it's something else, and the next day after that it's something else. And all these people who have been around him, both in his business career, as and in the White House and in his post White House life, they think they can manipulate him. They think they can manipulate him because he's a narcissist, and you can flatter him, and you can do all sorts of things to make him listen to you. But and he's not very smart. And the problem is, though, you can't control him, because something else will pop into his mind in the next hour. Someone else will whisper into his ears, or he's just completely inconstant. And that's because he has a jumbled, fried brain.
Well said.
Am I saying anything that's not consistent with your experience?
You're not. No. We always used to say at the Trump org, the guy who gets Donald's ear last controls the brain. And it happens to be the truth. Right. But, he has this ability of getting people, lawyers, myself included, to do shit that is outside of what they normally would. Now, Chris Kise, as an example, Chris Kise had a decent reputation as a lawyer. Correct. He's no Alina Habba. He's no Cliff Robert. I mean, he had a reputation.
Yeah, he's a good lawyer.
But I saw Chris Kise get up like a stupid ass during the case, the New York Attorney General case, and start waving his hands and jumping up and down. Of course, what are they doing? They're playing to a party of one. Yep. Sure. But he's now going even further. And Chris Kise accused the Trump Organization's independent monitor, Barbara Jones, of exaggerating immaterial issues in the Trump Organization's finances to fill this is his words, to fill the gaping hole in the Attorney General's case and justify the $2.6 million in fees collected by Jones. Can you do me a favor? Can you explain to my listeners what the hell is going on here?
I can't, I have not read Judge Jones's report, but I know Judge Jones. I've met Judge Jones. I've litigated in front of Judge Jones. In fact, the case that I had that went up to the Supreme Court, the one time I got to argue there, was a case that she dismissed. And the one thing I can tell you about Judge Jones is not just that she's smart like all these other federal judges, but she is a very cautious and careful and thoughtful person. Okay. She does not jump off and do, she's a very deliberate and careful person, and who she's not going to get this wrong. Okay. And she's not going to be making up things to help somebody's case. She's going to call it straight down the middle. She is as honest as the day is long. She is so, I mean, she is like, if you want to trust somebody, that's why she's picked for these jobs. That's why she was picked. She was picked as the discovery monitor in, I think, your case. I mean, everybody trusts her. Okay. She's gonna, you know, and as much, it's just crazy that anyone would attack Barbara Jones. It's just absolutely nuts.
There was something also that I saw pop up, that there was like $42 million of a discrepancy between monies in and monies out at the Trump organization. And I think that's part of what they're talking about here. But how could Chris Kise then turn around and make a claim that these are exaggerated, immaterial issues? This is her job. Her job is to make sure that every penny in and every penny going out is going to where it's supposed to go, that it is not done within which to defeat any potential verdict that could come in that could force a payment to, whether it's the Attorney General or to E. Jean Carroll or anybody for that matter. She is, as you rightfully stated, she's doing her job. So why would Chris Kise say something so stupid? And more importantly, could they now bring a potential sanctions claim against him or punish him for this behavior?
Look, I mean, I'd have to know more facts to make an assessment of how outrageous Kise's conduct is here. So I'm not gonna go out on a limb to say that he has done anything sanctionable. But I just will say that it is just not credible to suggest that Judge Jones is doing anything but doing her job. I mean, just by virtue of her reputation, and, you know, and conversely by reputation of Donald Trump. Okay, so it's not hard to figure out who's right here. You know, you can do it blindfolded.
Yeah, you're right. But here's the big problem and why I say it, and you're right. I don't have enough of the specific facts either to see whether or not sanctions are
honestly, I don't think it's worth, I don't know that it's worth the brain cells to try to figure that out. Honestly.
But here's the problem.
You know?
Here's the problem. If the goal is to set a precedent, every single judge so far that has been appointed, other than Judge Cannon in Florida, Donald has turned around and questioned their competency, their capabilities, their fairness. You know, he has attacked every single judge as being a partisan, unless you are in Trump's camp. And to the point, like Eileen Cannon, you know, some of her decisions are just asinine. But every single judge, every single lawyer, every single person is a liar to him. Everyone is, you know, it's all partisan.
What are the odds? What are the odds that everybody but Donald Trump is lying, right? And it's crazy. But yeah, you know, you're absolutely right, Michael. But the thing about it is, the best thing, to my mind, that these judges can do is to do simple justice in the principal cases before them. And that's what we ask of them. That's what they're going to do, to my mind, leaving apart the question of what Judge Cannon is doing in Florida. And I think a lot of judges feel generally with respect to sanctions, and I'm not talking here specifically about Donald Trump and his lawyers, is that it often produces unproductive satellite litigation that wastes the time of the court. And you know, I think that judges have tended to back off Trump in that regard. I think even Judge Kaplan, who is as tough as nails, backed off a bit when you or I would have been thrown out of that courtroom that day when Judge Kaplan warned Trump that he was verging on being thrown out of the courtroom. And Judge Kaplan said something like, "You really can't control yourself, can you?" And and Trump mouthed off, "And neither can you." And Judge Kaplan had previously said, "You want me to throw you out, don't you?" And he says, "I'd love it," said Donald Trump. You or I had pulled that before any federal or state judge in the nation. We would have been, the marshals or the court officers would have taken
handcuffs.
Us away. And we would have spent a night in the pokey or 2 nights in the pokey for criminal contempt. That said, I mean, he didn't do it. Judge Kaplan, held off because he didn't want to get distracted and didn't want to create a distraction from the event, the main event that was being conducted. His job was to conduct a fair trial. And he basically chose at that moment not to do something that he would have done to any other litigant because he felt that that was not the productive way to get to justice, which he did, by charging the jury and letting the jury deliberate and letting the jury do what it, had to do. I mean, he was letting, in a sense, Trump hang himself by his own rope by allowing Trump. I don't know if that particular instance that I described was in front of the jury. I assume it was not. But he understood that Trump's behavior was improper in the courtroom, but at the same time, the jury got to see it. And he understood, I'm sure, Judge Kaplan, that Trump was not doing himself any favors by acting out in front of the jury. And so he let Trump do it to some extent. And let Trump pay the price. And that, to me, was much better than any award of sanctions. And it showed. I mean, I think it's part of the reason why the jury came back with 65 million impunities.
Yeah, I agree with you. But, during my tenure at the Trump organization, I remember sitting down with Donald on many occasions and talking about different legal issues that arose, generally
Right.
real estate type issues. Yeah. And then there were personal ones, of course.
Sure.
And I've always said to him, which I'm 100% certain you would say to your client as well, right? You really want to get the best possible lawyer for this specific matter.
Correct.
You're really not going to go with somebody that just hung up a shingle or someone who doesn't have the reputation, especially in New York, right?
In New York and in the real estate business is very, very, I couldn't do, I would have to, there'd be a big learning curve for me to do real estate litigation in the city of New York.
Right.
I could mount that learning curve, but you want to go to somebody who actually has experience in the problem that you have. You don't want them to be having a learning experience on your dime. Absolutely true.
Right. And here in Manhattan, there's plenty of lawyers in every field.
Every field.
That are top notch. Top notch.
Correct.
But who does he have? He's got Alina Habba, who's literally making a fucking fool out of him. Forgetting about making a fool out of herself. She's made him look like a total asshole. And then again, you got Chris Kise.
He doesn't need much help, but yeah, you're right.
Right? And then you got Chris Kise, who, as I said before, he's ruined his reputation.
Kise was actually he's a good appellate lawyer. Yeah.
There's got to be someone out there who they could bring on who will at least remain calm while in court, cause him to remain calm and put on the best possible defense.
Tacopina turned out to be a pretty good lawyer. Not much he could do with this guy, but Tacopina, by all accounts, for people who were litigating against him and the journalists who saw him litigating in the court, Tacopina didn't do a bad job, particularly considering he was brought on like a month before the trial. And there's a reason why he's gone, because he did his job. And there's just people will not work for him for two basic. This has been going on since 2017. People will not work for him because he's fucking nuts and because he doesn't pay. And that's the reputation he had in New York. And that's the reputation that followed him. I remember in 2017, I was sitting in my office and Kellyanne calls me and said, "You're going to get a call from the president." This is like March or April. It was actually the day, I can pinpoint the day. It was the day Trump, it was like a Thursday or Friday afternoon, and he was flying to Saudi Arabia, okay, for that first big trip out there. And it was after he was looking for a lawyer to help defend him in the new Mueller investigation. Mueller had just been appointed, I don't know how many days before. And okay, sure. Okay, President of the United States is going to call me. Great. Ask me about lawyers. Fine. Okay, I'll give him opinions of lawyers. And he called me about all these lawyers. And it's like none of them ended up wanting to work for him. None. These were great lawyers that they were talking about. They were talking about Ted Olson. They were talking about who was that former U.S. attorney out in Chicago who was very good. They talk about a whole bunch of lawyers. And, and I would say, great lawyers, good lawyer, fantastic, perfect for this, and none of them would touch him. None of them would touch him even then. And it's the story. Who would it's just not worth it. Not worth it. Not worth being stiffed. Not worth having to argue with your client about doing basic things that you're required to do like everyone else. I mean, Donald Trump wants a lawyer to tell him he doesn't have to meet the obligations either in court or in litigation or outside of litigation that every other citizen has to meet. That's why he worshiped Roy Cohen, because Roy Cohen didn't play by the rules. So
yeah. The problem is not only does it affect Donald Trump's ability to get lawyers, but it affects everybody that's surrounding him. I remember personally when I needed to go find a lawyer, when I first received the notification from the House and the Senate Permanent Select Committees on Intelligence that they wanted me to come in and to testify. Yep. I could not find a firm that wanted to handle me because it was going to be paid, one, by the Trump organization, and two, because they wanted nothing to do. I was fortunate and I got a great lawyer out of McDermott, Will and Emery, but interestingly enough, he fucked them too. And he stiffed them also for over 7 years.
Your lawyer got stiffed by the Trump organization.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
Let me just say, the only person,
not shocking,
who has
right?
Really, not shocking at all. The only person who has managed to have, maybe not the only person, but the one person who comes to mind who has managed to have good counsel despite having been associated with Trump is Mark Meadows, who's represented by George Terwilliger. And, I don't agree with everything Terwilliger has done, but he's well represented by counsel. And then they got Paul Clement to represent Meadows in the Supreme Court because he's taking up the 11th Circuit decision not to remove the Fani Willis criminal case. But that's an exception. It is an exception. I mean, a lot of these people end up with terrible lawyers. And then there was the situation where this one guy, who I had some dealings with because he was in the White House counsel's office, and at one point he had something to do with the ethics filings that my wife had to make, and so I had to provide information to him. A guy named Stefan Passantino. I mean, he was basically accused, and I don't know. He was basically accused of trying to get Cassidy Hutchinson to not tell the truth before the January 6th committee. And then she replaced him and then was represented by a really, really great guy named Jody Hunt, who did a fantastic job for her. But, I don't know what's going on with Passantino, what he did exactly or whatnot. But it's just, it's just an awful story about how lawyers get involved with Trump and they just get into trouble, or the people they represent get into more trouble. And it's just a sad, sad, sad story.
Yeah. So since you mentioned Fani Willis, let me ask you this then, George. Fani Willis and her special counsel, Nathan Wade, have come under fire from Trump and Republicans, of course, for perhaps having a relationship.
Yeah.
even if they are having a relationship, is there really a conflict of interest?
No.
Right? I mean, could the case actually be dismissed as a result of it? Because, look, I know the Trump playbook better than anyone.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, I hate to say it, I'm partially responsible for the creation of it. The whole goal here is to bloody Fani Willis up in any way that they can. It's what they're doing to me. Anyone who is adverse to Donald needs to get bloodied up so that you could attack them on credibility, on motive, etc. You think that this case can actually be dismissed?
I too understand that.
yes, you do, George.
Not the way you do and some other people do, but yeah, I get it. Let me tell you, I mean, the Fani Willis situation, I mean, she didn't do herself any favors there.
Yep.
Hiring somebody you're having a relationship with in any context is just not a good idea. And it's particularly not a good idea when you're a public official. And that said, I mean, what the arrangement here may have, there may be issues under state procurement law or just as a matter of public administration, but it doesn't create any kind of an impropriety that a criminal defendant being charged by a grand jury should be able to avail himself or herself of. It's just got nothing to do with the validity of the charges. And there is, regardless of what the facts are here, it was just a pure political play, a pure attempt to just, as you say, bloody up the people who are lined up against you. Now, that said, she didn't do herself any favors there. But it's a blip, and this case is going to get tried on the merits, and the chips will fall where they will fall, and they will not be affected by this unfortunate episode.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, she certainly didn't do herself any favors.
Right.
But I love how they want to turn around and say that this case and everybody and all the jurors and everybody, all the prosecutors should all be dismissed. And
no, it's
have
not.
to recuse
I mean, the idea that the rapist has some kind of right to complain about a consensual relationship of somebody else is just insane.
Right. Exactly. So let me ask you this then, because since we were talking before also about Judge Cannon, I mean, she has dragged her feet in the Mar-a-Lago stolen documents case, like no judge that I've ever seen. I've never seen a case having, dragging. It's almost like it's crippled. There's a closed door meeting with special counsel Jack Smith that's raising alarm bells. What can Smith do to get a fair trial out of Judge Cannon and to push this case along, if anything?
Look, I mean, if a federal judge is determined to slow down a case, and I'm not saying she is or isn't, it certainly doesn't look like she's doing anything to move the case as quickly as I might like. There's very little that a litigant can do unless the judge does something completely insane. It is just the judges have so much discretion as to scheduling, and in this particular case, it's a simple case factually. I don't think it would take all that long to try, but with this classified documents overlay and the procedures that are required by federal statute in dealing with there are all sorts of ways that this thing can get bogged down, even though the fact of the matter is, the end of the day, the specific contents of these documents don't matter all that much. What matters is that they were sensitive documents relating to the nation's security. I mean, that's all that matters. And for purposes of the conspiracy, for purposes of obstruction, the content of the documents almost doesn't matter. And so, it's not, there's just a limit to what, there really isn't very much that Jack Smith can do.
It's a shame because you're right. It doesn't matter what the content of the top secret document is.
Right.
other than just saying it was a top secret document.
Right. And it
belonged
doesn't
to the
actually
National
even matter.
Archives.
Yeah. It doesn't even matter that the documents were classified under the Espionage Act. I mean, they just have to be not public, and they have to relate to national security, and there has to be some basis to believe that disclosure of these documents to the wrong people could cause the nation harm. And that's just a no-brainer with virtually anything that's handed up from a National Security Council to the president. So,
I mean, these documents belong to the American people.
Absolutely.
They need to be under the control of the National Archives.
Correct.
And the fact that they lied on documents to the FBI, claiming that all the boxes had been returned.
Move the documents around.
That's another lawyer that just got thrown under the bus.
Tried to destroy the videotapes. Tried to get a tech guy. I mean, this case is not hard. This case should be, I mean, if this were before Judge Conway, this case would be on trial. This case would be being tried right now, because it was brought last August. Actually, no, before that. This has been going on since 2022. 2022. Yep. This case should have been tried already, frankly.
So, since we're talking about cases that should be tried already, in terms of all of the Trump trials, and right now we have 4, right? The 4 indictments. Right. How do you see the year 2024 playing out? What cases do you think will actually get to court before the election? Because that's an issue too.
Yeah, I think the January 6th case I'm in Maryland actually, but in the District of Columbia, that case will get tried. Now, I mean, it's being increasingly delayed because the DC Circuit is taking longer than one might have expected to issue its decision on Trump's claim of immunity. But that said, the worst case, I think, in terms of delay would be the DC Circuit comes out with a decision in the next couple of weeks, and then they go straight up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides the case by June, and you have, again, cruel summer for Donald Trump.
So you think it could be by June, July?
I think it could by August at the latest. I think this case is going to get tried before the fall. I firmly believe that. I think it's highly unlikely that it's going to get delayed beyond that.
And what about the Fani Willis case?
I honestly don't know. It's a much more complex case because although a number of defendants have pled, it's a very involved case because of they charge so many people at once, and I haven't focused on how that's affecting the timetable. You have to check your local listings and ask a Georgia lawyer.
Then there's also the other Jack Smith case.
And that one, the one the Mara, as you say, Mar-a-Lago
documents.
Again, that is just imponderable. I just don't know. I mean, nominally, I think it's slated to go to trial in the next 2 or 3 months, but we'll have to see whether that's going to stick. If I were somebody determined improperly to delay a case for a litigant, and I were a federal judge, I mean, I would not reschedule the trial until a month or 2 before. So we have to see. We'll just have to see what happens there.
Because, as you know, the 4th case being the Alvin Bragg case, which is the business record.
Yeah, when is that one scheduled to go to trial?
March 25th. March 25th.
Okay, well, you're the person I need to ask. You think that's going to go to trial on March 25th?
I know it is. Yeah, I know it is. I'm already in document. I'm already in prepreration for review of documents for trial. I'm the key witness, or one of them.
I want to know. Well, I want to know if Stormy's going to testify. That's my.
Well, I'll call her and ask her. How's that?
You'll call her and ask her.
Yeah, I don't believe that
really
she's going to.
You know. She is smart.
She's very clever, and in many ways,
smart.
and she's got a great memory.
She was like a valedictorian of her high school class or something. She was actually she's like way smarter than Donald.
Way smarter than a lot of people give her credit for. But can I jump back on something else here for a second? Because We know, George, that between now and the election, Republicans are going to try and obstruct the law and the vote. I mean, just yesterday, a bill was proposed. I couldn't believe it when I
Georgia,
heard it.
the Georgia bill, like we're gonna
that would give the legislature absolute power to control. This is Arizona's electoral college votes, disenfranchising millions of citizens. I mean, how can we combat the barrage that's definitely going to be coming our way? And when I say our way, I'm not referring to Democrats. I'm referring to Americans. I mean, it's one person, one vote.
There are all sorts of groups, thank goodness, that are monitoring this stuff, and they'll bring claims. I mean, groups like Crew, Protect Democracy, and this fellow who does all that work for the Democrats, whose name escapes me right now. I mean, there's going to be a lot of litigation. I thought you were going to talk about this crazy law, this bill that got thrown into the hopper in Georgia that basically said that the RICO statute can't be used and then it basically lists all the charges in the Bonnie Willis case. Like we're against racketeering except this one case. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. These people are.
But this is the point I'm trying to make. It's going to be a fight. Right. It is going to be a barrage of bullshit. Could you imagine that Arizona? It doesn't matter what the outcome of the election is, that the legislature there can absolutely change the decision.
I don't think that's I don't think that's constitutional. I think you have to set in advance. I don't think that's consistent with the 12th Amendment. I defer to experts on this, but you have to set in advance the method, designate in advance the method by which electors are chosen, and you can't change the result if you don't like it. That's got to be fundamental. And I just don't think that I don't think that effort is going to stand, and both legally and politically. But that said, I mean, they're going to try anything they can. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's as stupid as the Georgia this proposed change in the Georgia RICO statute. I mean, that's what's going to happen, and it's going to become ongoing distractions, which is what Donald's all about, right? I mean, he would have been a great magician. Don't look here, look over here, right? I mean, that's who he is, and that's what the Republican Party is doing for him. It's all about deflection and distraction. So, absolutely. On that thought, who do you think that Trump will choose as his running mate? Because the smart folks out there are saying that he should pick a woman. And I think, personally, Elise Stefanik is a disaster. Nikki Haley won't do it. At least that's her own words. And Carrie
he wouldn't
Lake,
pick Nikki. He wouldn't pick Nikki Haley.
No.
He wouldn't. He won't pick Nikki Haley because she's not sufficiently loyal enough to him. Carrie Lake is very devoted to him, but he won't pick her because she gets too much attention. He's got to be the center of attention. That's what he liked about.
She's also booed by her own party. But George, she's also being booed by her own party.
I know. She is who she is. But that said, I mean, the reason why Mike Pence was such a perfect fit was because he was always deferential to him, and he was just never going to upstage the boss. And
toast.
That's it's absolutely right. I think that's why I think Stefanik might have a chance, because I think she's going to behave. She's sufficiently obsequious enough to. I think in some ways she'd be better for him than Pence was, because she knows how to go on the attack, but she will always be obsequious to him and do his bidding. So, I mean, I think Stefanik has a good chance, and I agree with you. Stefanik is to me, she's a lowlife. She's an absolute, the worst people who have devoted themselves to Trump are the ones who know better. And she's smart enough that she knows better. Mm-hmm. And I think she's among the worst of the worst. She Ron and Romney changed their name to whatever it is.
McDaniels. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
She didn't want to have any affiliation to the Mitt Romney.
No,
you know,
to
so
the honorable name and the honorable family. She wanted to hide.
Yeah.
Because Trump can't stand.
But you know what bothers me a lot, George, about the whole thing with Elise Stefanik? I have friends here in New York, also incredibly successful, intelligent people. And they say, well, did you see Elise Stefanik the other day when she went against the Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania?
I'll give her credit. She did it, but she's not stupid. She's smart. She did a good job with them. I mean, it wasn't that hard.
But they ignore everything else.
Of course.
They ignore everything else. And all it's about is the fact that she had prepared some pretty decent questions for the presidents of MIT, Harvard, and UPenn. I mean, that negates all the other crazy shit.
I give her credit for that. But I mean, the first time I ever focused on Elise Stefanik was they put her out, the Republicans put her out front in the 2019 fall impeachment hearings. And the first thing she did basically was go on this diatribe lying about how she had been, not given time to ask questions, when in fact there was a specific agreement that both sides had abided by, dividing up the time. And she just pretended that she was cut off because the Democrats didn't want to hear from her. It's like, no, there was a rule. It was specific. I mean, it was just one of the most disgraceful things I'd ever seen. And it was even just a procedural. And she is absolutely appalling on so many levels.
Because rules don't apply to them.
No.
They apply to you. So in their minds, it's the same thing as Donald at any debate. He wants to monopolize 90% of all of the conversation, and then the other 10% should be about praising him. That's what he wants. Unfortunately, he doesn't get it, which is why he'll never debate. I'd like to see, and I'm looking forward to seeing, if he becomes the nominee, I would like to see a debate between him and Joe Biden. I think that will really show who's cognitively capable and who's not. But George, as the hour in mea culpa comes to an end, I have one last question for you.
Yes, sir.
You think that Trump actually makes it to the general election? Because Nikki Haley's not backing down. And what we're seeing is that
he's going to get the nomination. Whether he physically makes it to the general election is another question.
Don't forget,
he's going to get the nomination.
Before we jump onto him getting the nomination, let's not forget that the big dollar donors, many of them are lining up behind Nikki Haley.
Doesn't matter. They're not.
You think he makes it no matter what?
He makes it no matter what. I don't see how Nikki can beat him. The only way I thought he could possibly have been beaten would have been just a race that was one-on-one from the very beginning, with somebody who just relentlessly attacked him and drove him crazy and made him behave like a lunatic. That was the only chance of that. And the problem with that would be you'd end up alienating, half the Republican Party. So there was no path to victory against Donald Trump in this year's Republican Party. I don't think there's a path to victory now. I think, the best that she can do is make inroads in states where there is some crossover voting. And I think she will make some inroads in those states. She's probably going to lose her own state of South Carolina by 20 or 30 or maybe 40 points. I don't think she is a long-term play, but I do appreciate the fact that she's finally going after him in some of the ways that I would go after him if I were running against Trump, attacking his mental stability and his mental competence, which is just obviously deficient, and making a big deal of that finally. I mean, this is what all the candidates should have been doing since last summer, but they didn't because they were too cowardly, and it's just a shame. That said, though, even if Nikki Haley wins the nomination or manages to get the number of delegates she needs to win the nomination, Trump's going to sabotage her. Trump will absolutely do everything he can to keep her from winning, even if it elects a Democrat, because that's his character. He's vengeful, and he bases, if I can't have the Republican Party, nobody can. So, the Republicans are screwed either way.
But
Either way,
you
they're
brought something up that's
good.
interesting, George. We said, that it would if Nikki Haley had done this or any Republican had done this early on, they would have alienated 50% of the Republican Party. And I totally agree with that at that time. But let's not forget, look at Iowa, look at New Hampshire. Donald lost 50% of the Republican vote to whether it was DeSantis or Nikki Haley. So that same 50% has been alienated. He did it to himself.
Okay, but New Hampshire is a special case, remember, because there was crossover voting, and the Republicans there are a little more sensible than Republicans in a lot of other states. I don't think New Hampshire is the bellwether of what's going to happen in some of these Republican primaries, and I just don't think the numbers will add up in the end. And remember, the rules are stacked up in favor of whoever wins a plurality of the vote. That has been the case since at least 2012, 2016, when the party changed the rules because Newt Gingrich gave Mitt Romney such a hard time going into May and June, even though Newt had no chance of winning the nomination. He didn't drop out, and it kept the race going to the Republicans' disadvantage, Romney's, and to the Republicans' disadvantage. So they changed the rules to make it such that, and I don't know the technical details of it, but basically, in a nutshell, if you start winning right around Super Tuesday, some of these primaries are basically winner takes all. Even if you get 35-40% of the vote, you get virtually the lion's share of delegates. And that's how Trump won in 2016. And that's how in 2020, there was no contest. And in 2024, these same rules are basically in effect. It's stacked against any challenger. And the fact of the matter is, he still has majority support among Republican registered voters.
Yeah, hard to believe and crazy. George,
amazing, but it's true.
Nobody says it the way you do. Thank you for your insight, your straight talk. You're the best, and I will definitely be speaking to you again.
Express, right? The modern straight talk express. Thank you for having me, as always, Michael.
Thank you, George.
Get together next time we're in New York.
And I'll be in DC soon too.